Hello to all of you, good morning. We will continue today and finish the Nichomachean Ethics, our commentary on the second book, our lecture on the second book. If you remember last time, we, after talking about different ways to acquire the right pleasure for the right action through education, we then mentioned three characteristics of the actions that are in accordance with virtues. We said that the action, for such actions, we must have knowledge of doing actions, such actions that are in accordance with virtue. So we must have knowledge of what they are and then choose them for their own sakes, right? And thirdly, so we must have knowledge and choose these actions for their own sake, and the action must proceed from a firm and unchangeable character, which is of course acquired through education and thus through habit. Okay. So now we move on. We are on page 28 on the definition of moral virtue. And once again, we are going to really jump and get in this section to the essential. If we move to the second paragraph, we will see one characteristic of the virtues and their opposites, of course, the vices. Aristotle tells us they are not just passions, right? Now, neither the virtues nor the vices are passions, because we are not called, of course, good or bad. We have to pass a moral judgment. We are not called good or bad on the ground of our passions, but are so called on the ground of our virtues and our vices, and because we are neither praised nor blamed for our passions. So we cannot speak of them as passions. Okay. Whatever, of course, we mean by passion. That means, for example, the appetite. He gives you some: anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, friendly feeling, hatred, longing, emulation, etc. All these passions. You are not called good or bad, good or evil, if you like, also on account of passions. So they are not passions we have. So what's the difference there? If we continue on, we are on page 29 with the first paragraph. Again, we feel anger and fear without choice. Those are passions, fear and anger. But here's the difference with virtues, is that there is choice, right? But the virtues are modes of choice or involve choice. Okay. Further, in respect of the passions, we are said to be moved, right? You are affected and moved by the passions. But in respect of the virtues and the vices, we are said not to be moved, but to be disposed in a particular way. The Greek word is hexis. It means you are in a particular way. You have a character already there that makes you disposed in a particular way. So you are not moved. It's not something that's affecting you and making you feel in a specific feeling through, and so this is a passion. No, you are disposed in a certain way, and we know how. It's through education that you become disposed. We almost say today predisposed in a particular way. Okay. So I jump one paragraph. If then the virtues are neither passions nor, of course, capacities, you can look up. Capacities are things, capabilities we have by nature, or which is not the case. For example, you have the capacity to do good math by nature. You have the capacity to perhaps lift stones more than another by nature. Of course, it's not a capacity either. If then the virtues are neither passions nor capacities, all that remains is that they should be, once again, states of character. And I remind you of our reading on Tuesday, right? That the third characteristic is that of the action that is done in accordance with virtue is that it must proceed from a firm and unchangeable character. Okay, so the virtues are states of character. You have a character, in other words, that's virtuous. Okay. The differentia now of moral virtue. It is a disposition to choose the intermediate. Two kinds of intermediates are distinguished here. Okay. What we can retain. Let's read paragraph 2. Well, even paragraph 1. Okay. So the differentia of moral virtue, it is a disposition to choose the intermediate. So it's once again a state of character that allows you to choose the intermediate. And here he is going to distinguish two kinds of intermediates. We must, however, not only describe virtue as a state of character, but we must also say what sort of state of character it is. We may remark then that every virtue or excellence both brings into good condition the thing of which it is the excellence and makes the work of that thing be done well. For example, the excellence of the eye is what makes both the eye and its work, which is looking at something, seeing something, good. For it is by the excellence of the eye that we see well. Similarly, the excellence of the horse, etc. I jump one sentence. Therefore, if this is true in every case, the virtue of man also will be the state of character which makes a man good and which makes him do his own work well. Very clear. All right. I read again. The virtue of man also will be the state of character which makes a man good and which makes him do his own work well. Okay. I want to remind you, I spoke about this before, of the word virtue, and in order for you to always distinguish it from something like virtual, the virtue of something in a way is its excellence, right? Like the excellence of the eye, right? I give you an example. If I take a medicine, if I take Panadol, right? What is the most real in the Panadol, right? Is actually its excellence. What is the most used by us as the best in the thing? Is its highest reality. I tell you this because it's the opposite of how we use the word virtual today, which is non-reality. It became the opposite. So I go back to the Panadol. The virtue of the Panadol is its excellence. Its excellence is what? It's not that its shape is round. It's not that its color is white. It's not that it's light. No. What is the reality of the Panadol, in fact? It's that it stops the headache, right? Or it cures something. Okay. This is the excellence of the Panadol. We don't care about any other characteristics in it. It's the same, right? The excellence of the eye, as an example. It's not its color. It's that it makes you see well. And it's the same then when we speak about morals, about ethics. The excellence of the man is in the state of his character, how he behaves. It doesn't matter if you are helping someone, for example, because you're generous, if you do it with money or you do it with giving him a car or with whatever. It doesn't matter if you look white, if you look black, etc. The excellence of you is in your character. The character is a disposition you have that you acquired then to be generous. Okay? I continue then with the second paragraph under this heading. How this is to happen we have stated already, but will be made plain also by the following consideration of the specific nature of virtue. Okay, a state of character which makes man good or bad. In everything that is continuous and divisible, it is possible to take more, less, or an equal amount. Like money, you can take more money, less money, or the same amount of money. And that either in terms of the thing itself or relatively to us. And the equal is what? Is an intermediate between excess and defect. Okay? So not too much, not too little. By the intermediate in the object, what do I mean? I mean that which is equidistant. It means at the same distance from each of the extremes, which is one and the same for all. but by the intermediate relatively to us, that which is neither too much nor too little, and this is not one nor the same for all. Right? So, he's telling us that virtue has something to do with what is intermediate, right? Now, he's saying it's not an intermediate like of an object. If I take, I'm sitting now at my desk, and I want to see what is the intermediate, if you like, in the length of this desk. Of course, it will be the middle, because on one side I'll have, let's suppose, 75 centimeters, and on the other side 75. Okay, so this is in the object itself. But when we are dealing with ethics, of course, and we're dealing with virtue, this is about man and the character of man. So it's going to be measured in how I act with other men. Now, he's saying it's also then an intermediate, but it's relatively to us. So it's not the one and the same for all. For example, since I gave you the example of generosity, if I'm a rich man, or I'm just a moderately rich man, or I'm just a normal middle class guy, for a rich man to be generous is to give perhaps $1 million to charity. But for someone like me, your poor teacher, teachers being among the poorest in the world, maybe generosity would be to give 100 to someone. Okay, that's why it's relative to the person. Okay, this is the difference between these two intermediates: the objective one, and if you like, the subjective one in a way, relative to us. But avoid these words, subjective and objective, which are of later than Aristotle. Now, I jump to the next paragraph, and please count with me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 line. Next paragraph, page 30, of course, still. He says, and if further virtue is more exact and better than any art, as nature also is, then virtue must have the quality of aiming at the intermediate, right? Of the most excellent things about man is, of course, to be virtuous. This is why it's so important. So the virtue then, like everything excellent, must aim at the intermediate. I continue. I mean moral virtue, for it is this that is concerned with passions and actions, and in these there is excess, defect, and the intermediate. For instance, both fear and confidence and appetite and anger and pity and in general pleasure and pain may be felt both too much and too little, and in both cases not well. They could be felt not well. But to feel them at the right times, so again, fear, confidence, appetite, anger, pity, and in general pleasure and pain may be felt, all these, too much or too little, too much fear, too little fear, too much confidence, too little confidence, too much pain, too little, and in both cases well or not well. But to feel them at the right times, please underline them here, you must feel them at the right times, 1, with reference to the right objects, 2, towards the right people, 3, with the right motive, 4, and in the right way, 5, is what is both intermediate and best, and this is characteristic of virtue. Okay? You notice how, as usual, Aristotle gives us determinations, and then he adds to them. We already had some determinations at the end of last class, and we are adding here. Okay? So, I remind you once again, the virtues are not passions, right? The virtues are not how I feel about certain things. But, of course, they are there in order to work on those passions. How? By feeling those passions, by having them at the right time, towards the right objects, right? Towards the right people, with reference to the right objects, towards the right people, with the right motive, and in the right way. Okay? This is what is the intermediate for virtue. So if we take an example, let's say something that may sound strange to you. Fear. Why should fear be in connection with virtue? We can say to have fear at the right time. For example, it's when you have a snake. If you are not afraid of the snake, there's a problem. Okay? With reference to the right object, towards the right people, with the right motive. If there is my son and the snake is there and is going to attack him, I feel it perhaps toward anyone who might take the snake and put it in front of my son and who is very powerful, etc. With the right motive, what is my motive for feeling this fear? It's of course to preserve life, to preserve my life and to preserve the life of my son, and in the right way. In the right way. It means I feel fear, but not in order to just run away and let my son, for example, be bitten and the guy who brought the snake be happy with it. No, in the right way, I feel fear, so I take my son, I take myself, and we go a bit further and maybe try to even kill the snake. Okay, this is why this is just an impromptu example I just gave you. Okay, so it's always the way of dealing with our passions, in having them at the right time, with reference to the right objects, towards the right people, right? Generosity, for example, with the right motive, and in the right way. And I continue. Similarly, with regard to actions, also there is excess, defect, and the intermediate, just like with passions. Now, virtue is concerned with passions and actions in which excess is a form of failure, and so is defect, while the intermediate is praised and is a form of success. So if I take generosity, once again, what are the defects? The defect is to be a miser, bakhil, to keep all your money to yourself. And the excess is what? Is tabdhir, is when you waste all your money, basically. And then, of course, it's impossible to be generous because you've wasted it. In both cases, you kill generosity. So, I reread now. Now, virtue is concerned with passions and actions in which excess is a form of failure, and so is defect. While the intermediate is praised and is a form of success. And being praised and being successful are both characteristics of virtue. Therefore, virtue, please underline here, virtue is a kind of mean, since, as we have seen, it aims at what is intermediate. Okay? So, of course, I take the word mean here in its statistical sense. So, it's not what we call in statistics the median. It's not the one that is in the middle. No, it's a mean. It's a mean. The mean could be closer, in other words, to one extreme than the other. If we take just generosity, most of us will agree that generosity is closer to profligacy, tabdhir, than it is to miserly, to avaricious behavior, right? Than to bukhl. Okay? So the mean can be closer to one of the extremes, but it's not, of course, the extremes. It's just can be. It's not in the middle. It can be closer to one or the other. Okay. So I go with me to paragraph 31 to give now a further definition, more determination of virtue. Right now, right before that, we said we have to feel things, passions at the right times, for the right objects, toward the right people, the right motive, and the right way. We had 5 determinations with regard to with regard to virtue in connection with passions. And now we have 6 things that will determine virtue for us. So if I read the second paragraph, so page 31. Virtue then, you can underline here 4 lines, this whole sentence with me. Virtue then is, first, a state of character, as we saw, concerned with choice, as we saw, lying in a mean, which we have just seen, that is to say, id est, the mean relative to us, okay, 4. This being determined by reason, so reason is involved here, we have to assess things rationally with our reason, and by that reason by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it, 6. So it's a particular kind of reason. It's not the reason that is dealing with mathematics. It's not a reason that is dealing with theoria, with theory. It is a reason, in fact, that is called phronesis. You can write it, if you like, Phronesis, phronesis, practical wisdom, phronesis in Greek. So I repeat then, we have very clear determination here of virtue. It's a state of character. First, concerned with choice. 2, lying in a mean. 3, that mean is relative to us. 4, is determined by reason. 5, and that particular kind of reason that is practical wisdom. Phronesis, 6. Okay. If I take again the example of generosity, we can say that it is a mean between being a miser and being profligate, as I said. And let's just say that this is, at this point, all you need to know. Okay? I'm not going to develop further. Of course, if you read the rest of book 2 and have questions, do not hesitate to write me an email or ask even on WhatsApp within the group, so others can benefit from your questions. So let's just be very simple now, review very quickly our commentary or our lecture on moral virtue in book 2 of Aristotle's Nichomachean Ethics. We learned then that there is such a thing as moral virtue and intellectual virtue. The intellectual virtues can be many. But what's important for us here in this book is moral virtue and what is its nature. So we learn that it is neither by nature that you are moral, so you are not born, perhaps you have very good intellectual virtues at some point, but the moral virtue cannot come to you by nature. You cannot be born generous. You cannot be born kind. You cannot be born courageous, right? But it's also not contrary to our nature. It's not contrary to the human nature to be courageous. It is actually in accordance with it. But you have to learn it. Okay? So that means what? It means we have a predisposition, if you like. We have what we call potentiality, in potentia. So this is not something, when we say you have potentiality, it's not an empty thing. Not everything can have a potentiality. For example, we have the potentiality to become moral beings. We have the potentiality to learn physics, but we don't have the potentiality to know the whole universe. We don't have it. So we will never become knowledgeable in the whole universe. Okay? So once again, moral virtue is not naturally in us, but we are predisposed to it. We have it potentially. Okay, so it is not against our nature. So of course, it's something that we have to learn. We learn it from childhood. So we need a good education, and we learn it through habit. So it means that you have to get used to doing these acts. Moreover, since we are creatures of pleasure and pain, this habit, which involves, of course, an education through repetition, will help us feel pleasure for the right actions and feel pain for the right actions that we have to feel pain about. So if I see a good person suffering, I should feel pain. This is a virtuous person, then I am virtuous. And if I see a good person who saved the country, for example, praised, I should feel also happy. And the opposite, if I feel bad when a good person wins, then I'm not virtuous. And if I feel bad and if I feel good when somebody is suffering, then of course I'm also not virtuous. So it has to do also with pleasure and pain. And we know that the occasion when I feel is very important. We know that we have to then, because it's based on the occasion, to consider each occasion. Okay? Because if I see someone being rewarded, this is, let's suppose, the occasion, I have to consider it. Does this person at this point deserve to be rewarded or not? Then I will feel good. And if he doesn't deserve to be rewarded, someone else should, then I should feel bad, right? So the occasion is very important. Okay. And finally then, I reread with you, virtue is a state of character. Again, education gives it. Concerned with choice, you always have to choose an action. You have to choose what to do, what not to do, what things should give you pleasure, what things should not. Lying in a mean, you have to be in the middle, and of course excess and defect are destructive, they are vices, right? If you have too little or too much, this destroys the excellence, it destroys the virtue, and this has to be judged by us. So of course we're going to need practical wisdom from experience. So this practical wisdom, since it is practical, as I said, phronesis, it means something also that involves action, praxis in Greek. But it also means that the older you get and the more experience you get, the better your practical wisdom is. This is why an older person who has had a lot of practical wisdom can be a better judge, perhaps, of certain situations and can have a more developed virtue. So this is also something to retain. And let's end with saying the main thing in the definition of virtue in Aristotle is that virtue is a mean between two vices, between two extremes. The extremes are the vices and the mean is the virtue. So that's it for today. We have finished Nichomachean ethics. This is all I want you to retain from here. And we are going to move in our next reading to I believe Plotinus, or Plato rather. But I suppose we had no. Okay, I'm sorry. We will move. Our next reading will be David Hume. I thought we had Hume before. So Hume, Enquiries into the Principles of Morals. We will be dealing with selection from section 1. So Enquiries into the Principles of Morals. Please read that for our next class, which is next week. Hume, Enquiries into the Principles of Morals, section 1. Meanwhile, good luck to all. And I was not planning necessarily on giving you homework for Aristotle. Perhaps some contrast between Aristotle and Kant, Kant's Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, could be interesting. Let's do that, actually. Let's say actually let's stop. If I think of an interesting contrast between them, I will write you. Meanwhile, just do the reading once again. Look at the notes once again that you're taking from listening to the lecture, and any questions are more than welcome.